Hello and welcome to another episode of Andy's Chomping at the Bit, brought to you by bigandymedia, the official sponsor of most of the Andy's Chomping at the Bit episodes. So today's topic, I went on my way to find a topic that I felt a lot of people tend to feel less comfortable discussing, to put it lightly. And so it's a topic that a lot of people don't discuss, including myself often. But that topic is around addiction, but more particularly sex addiction. It's not exactly, I think a lot of people don't understand sex addictions, uh, especially when it's from a guy. A lot of people assume, well, all guys are addicted to sex. And that is not true. In fact, the majority of guys are not addicted. You could argue that the majority of guys are driven by sexual interaction. You can make the argument that most guys enjoy sexual interaction, but being addicted to sex is different than simply enjoying it or desiring it frequently. So there's certain aspects that line up with other addictions like with drugs and overeating, and that they tend to repeat across the board, including sex addiction. So one of the things that I'm going to go into my own personal life here on my experience with it, because that is one of my major addictions. So just to put them out there, got the crack addiction, the drug addiction. That was a big one. Nicotine addiction. I struggled with that one for a while. Caffeine. That one wasn't a problem as much until near the end, but I had that too. And then also, as I mentioned, the sex addiction. Um, and so when I went into treatment, into 2022 to be more precise, that treatment, I focused on those four things. Some of them were easy, like the crack addiction at that, and the sex addiction were pretty easy in treatment because, well, you're in a controlled environment where those aren't available. Nicotine and caffeine were a little harder, but I was able, while in a controlled environment, to get those under control. But what I realized, and I think I said overeating. So what I realized though was some addictions, simply abstinence on them is the, for the rest of your life, like there's no reason for me to ever pick up and smoke crack again. Cocaine's not, there's no point in having that in my life anymore. There's no reason I need to go back at it for any reason. There's no positive reason to go back to it. Same with nicotine, really same with caffeine, right? Substances, I don't need them. Other people might use them. They can, that's their choice. I don't have to, right? But there's some things like food you do need to eat. So that becomes a harder addiction to deal with. Sex it's in a gray area where technically you don't have to, but realistically the idea of never having sex again is very unrealistic, especially, as far as the way you work in recovery is it's not simply having to, it's because you want to. And well, if I'm being honest, saying I'd never want to have sex again, it's just not realistic. Right. So I decided that I had to understand the drive of that, because the reality is the substance, the action in addiction isn't the addiction itself, if that makes sense. It's not the disease itself. So when I was using, or when people are drinking, it is a symptom, I guess you can say, of addiction. It's a bigger underlying problem, and that just happens to be what you're using to fill the void, figuratively speaking. Um, so the same thing is, within a sex addiction. So I had to go back and really reflect on where I was mentally, what was going through my mind, what was driving me at those moments. And it changed over time. I can tell you that right now too. So originally, and if I'm being transparent and honest on it, my sex addiction came before my drug addiction. It was a little bit before that. But so the original reason that I went, and started going that direction was I had issue in my life with not being content. It didn't matter what the situation was. It didn't matter if I had what material I had. It didn't. Nothing would make me happy. It didn't matter what experiences I faced, what traveling, who the people I was with, and I was trying to fill that emptiness because I wasn't content. I was trying to find something. If I get this, I'll be happy. If I get this, I'll feel whole. Um, and so I was doing more and more um, risky behaviors, and that ended up being one of those. And the drive on it was, as far as thought was, um, that for those moments, I didn't, for those moments, I wasn't alone. I was lonely still. That's the thing. I was still lonely because, like I said, if you're not, well, this is my take on it. If you're not content, if there's something that's eating up on you, and you don't like who you are at the moment, you don't respect yourself, it doesn't matter if you have friends and family around you all the time, you're still gonna feel lonely. You're not gonna be alone, but you're gonna be lonely. And I didn't know that at the time. That was a very new understanding. So a lot of that was that simply, the presence of someone, and then obviously obviously the feeling also because it was a distraction. It was, a pleasure to in the moment help me forget some of the things I was struggling with mentally, uh, some things I didn't want to address mentally. Uh, so that was the basis of it. That's where it started, and it went for that for a while. And the driving force was simply not wanting, because in the moments there was someone there, and I felt happy and pleased, or not happy. I felt joy and pleasure. I didn't understand what happiness was at that point. Um, But at the end, they weren't actually, unfortunately, they weren't really relationships, actual relationships. That's how the addiction works. It's a specific thing that you're driving at, um, and it wouldn't fill the figurative void, no matter who or how long. I still didn't uh, feel right. And then my drug addiction started going in there too. Next thing you know, they're going hand in hand. I can't do one without the other. And that fueled a very hard downward, figuratively, hard downward spiral. And it put me in some pretty bad situations. But then the mental side of things twisted. So it changed after, I think the moment that it changed, I haven't really thought too deep on it, but I think the moment where it really changed the mental aspect of it was after I had been sexually assaulted out in Denver, Colorado. After that, you think that whole experience would have killed everything, um, but it was driven in a different way. At that point, I started going to sex because it was it was a distraction from the pain. Well, it was a distraction from a lot more of shame and humiliation. It's almost like um, it was almost like I had been I was hurt so much mentally from that experience, the past experience, that I was constantly wanting to um, I was constantly wanting to have sex with women because that would uh, make me feel distracted and less suffering from the sexual assault experience. That was not from a female, unfortunately. Oh, I shouldn't say unfortunately. It shouldn't have happened to begin with. But so it was more of a distraction. It was kind of, in a way, trying to build up a manliness in my head over something that previously uh, shouldn't have, wasn't even really tied with masculinity and that whole thing. It's just psychologically it turned into that feeling, and then and it went further after that. It evolved to, it was no longer simply being there in the moment with someone. It was all of a sudden I couldn't, even that wasn't enough for me. Simply the sex wasn't enough. It was all of a sudden, well, now if they're not, you know, if they're not enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying it, then I can't enjoy it. It was almost like contingent upon their response, less than mine, less than about the physical pleasure, but more of the feeling of, it was driven almost like I had felt that was my value at that point in my life. I felt that that was my strength. I felt that if um, you know if with sexual interaction, if if the person's pleased, then they will appreciate me more. But I also, because of that, felt that if I stopped, or if I didn't want to keep going, that that they that was all I had. I felt that was all I had worth, um, and so it became literally an addiction like any other addiction. Like so, you hear about drug addiction where someone will spend an entire day using. Well, in my deepest points of the sex addiction, it was the same way. It was constant, constant. Uh, and the drive was there, even if the physical ability wasn't there. It was literally, that was because it was low self-esteem. It was a fear of rejection if I wasn't continuously doing that. Uh, a fear that that was my only value remaining. Uh, and so by figuring out those psychological aspects of that addiction, I gained a better understanding of what my path forward would have to be, as far as, you know, if that's something I wanted to if I wanted to have sex again. Well, I have to figure out. Uh, I had to understand my thoughts and find a pathway, or an understanding of how it could still happen without slipping back into an addiction, just like with food. I have to eat, but there's certain things I have to understand and apply and work with to ensure that I don't overeat, compulsively, excessively eat, which can still happen today if I let down my guard, or ignore if I ignore something that is that I'm aware of that can trigger that behavior. It's still there. Uh, so with sex, I realized that with having it as the driving force behind everything, I didn't take the time to develop the other aspects of what a healthy relationship would be. Obviously, the physical side was there, but nothing else existed. So I understand now that to not relapse in that, but not at the same time not go completely abstinence. I mean, that could always become a priest or something where they're simply not allowed, but that's really not my path. Uh, but I realized I had to develop the other aspects of a relationship first. So there can be certain physical aspects, there's like physical touch within a relationship. So, but they're not to the level of the sexual things, because I need to develop, before I go into that, I need to develop the mental, emotional, the whole social aspect, the bond of the relationship. I'll even tie in the spiritual aspect of it. So every other aspect has to be set and strong, and stable before, if I'm being honest with myself and the prospective partner, I have to have all those strong and stable before I go into the sexual side of things. Because if I don't, there's that part in my head still that will feel that that is my only value. I don't believe it today. I don't know for sure if that would kick in full gear, but if it's like any other addiction, it probably would. It's just how addictions work. You can't simply go deep into an addiction and then walk away and then come back and just a tad. No, it's usually that tad ends up being right where you left off. That's how addiction typically works. So, and then usually in that situation triggers other cravings from other addictions. So it can snowball pretty quickly. So I came up with that thought process, and I've talked to my previous therapist and even my former peer recovery coach, and I probably even talked to my case manager back in the day on that stuff as well, because it's essential for in the long term of a romantic relationship, understanding that, because if you go too early on, if I go too early on that, I could destroy what could have been a good relationship. I could jeopardize something worth saving because of that. And in the reality, it's not the biggest part of a relationship. Honestly, I was driving with that, trying to have that be more than it really was as far as value. I was trying to have the physical aspect, trying to use that to fill the feeling that you would also have with the social and mental and emotional, spiritual, all those other aspects of the relationship. I was trying to put it all into this one little area, and it doesn't work like that. I mean, I tried, but it doesn't. Uh, and it's not a race either, you know? A lot of people today, they try racing through these things. And I'm not just talking about sex, I'm talking about in a relationship as a whole. People feel that, and for some people it works. Like my grandparents, I think they weren't dating too long back in the day, that they got engaged and married pretty darn quick. But then there's other people like my parents, they dated for multiple years before they even got engaged, and then they got married, and I you know I have other family members that are in the same boat where it took a longer period of time before certain aspects. It's not a race. And I look at those people in particular as a guide for that, as far as not racing, not saying, okay, by this time it has to happen, because those individuals that I look to, um, they're not just married and still married. Uh, they're in very healthy relationships, long-term healthy relationships. And that's ultimately what this sex addiction for me was tying. It was trying to create something but I was trying to create it instantly. I was trying to cut corners. I didn't want to spend this time and this time. I didn't want to talk and do this, and then have the roll the dice on if it's going to work or not. And I was just going right to one thing. I'm like, okay, that'll do it, but it didn't. And I was stubborn, and of course addicted, so it didn't go well. And I always say, well, as soon as I meet the right person, then get everything back together. The reality is you can't wait until you meet the right person, because you're not going to meet, statistically speaking, you're probably not going to meet the right person with that behavior, that state of mind. I don't have a problem as far as ever really thinking about or having cravings for my crack cocaine addiction. I can comfortably say that. I really don't crave caffeine anymore. Even when I'm tired, I don't crave caffeine. It's just bizarre. Um, and I rarely think about even nicotine. It's usually if I smell it a little bit, I'm really stressed, it might pop in my head a little bit, but not much. The food I still struggle with sometimes. And the sex addiction, though I haven't struggled with it as far as relapsing, the thoughts do still eat away sometimes. The desire still pops in to my mind every so often. And that's what makes it challenging. And there's not a whole lot of options for support. There are SAA, which is Sex Addicts Anonymous, and there's SAA, which is Sexaholics Anonymous. So there are things like that, but they're not as common, because talking about sex addiction is not something people often do. People are uncomfortable. People don't want to listen. They don't want to talk. That it's just not something people would rather pretend it doesn't exist, or they acknowledge it exists, but they don't want to talk about any of the details. And that creates a bigger problem. When we don't talk, when we don't discuss, we don't want to listen, that's how stigmas are created. And stigmas happen in so many areas across the spectrum, from in mental health and various addictions. There are so many stigmas that are created because not enough people talk, and not enough people take the time to really listen. And then all it takes is one or two bad eggs that people witness or experience, and it destroys every bit of hope for, in their eyes, for anyone else that resembles that. And it's the birth of a stigma. And they pass that information along to someone, and then people learn that way. And that's how societies create stigmas. There's people do something and they have this with them, and people automatically associate that characteristic, that trait, with that person's condition. And I'll probably do another episode later on simply on stigmas, but I just wanted to address that's why I'm bringing up the sex addiction. It's one that we don't talk about often as society. It's one that I even don't talk about. Now, I was torn between doing a sex addiction topic today or doing one on compulsive behavior, which sex addiction also has compulsive behavior. But when I had the two options, I did what my primary counselor in treatment the last time, what she had suggested is excellent advice, and I keep it as part of my process in my recovery to this day, and that is, when you're stuck at a crossroads of two choices, or two or more choices, the choice that is less comfortable, the choice that is harder to address, is usually the choice you should take, the path you should take. And there's so much truth to that. Doing what's uncomfortable, addressing what's uncomfortable, hitting those topics that you're able to discuss, but not comfortably. Those are the ones that I have to push on. That's what I'm talking about this one. There's actually one other addiction I have, and I'll talk about that probably in about 3 to 6 months, just because I'll part away from this one a little bit, but I'll get to that eventually. Anyway, that is your episode of Andy's Chomping at the Bit for today. I will see you again on Monday for another Daily Biscuit, and stay tuned tomorrow for a special announcement. Have a great day.